They toasted to my brother's future right in front of me, like I'd never existed. No one looked my way, no one raised a glass for me. Just smiles, cameras, and the click of champagne flutes celebrating the true heir of the Moreno legacy. That was the night I knew. They'd already erased me. Quietly, completely. I don't remember what I was wearing that evening. Maybe black, maybe grey. Something invisible enough to match how they saw me. The reception was lavish, like always. Gold accents, orchestra in the corner, the scent of money and power thick in the air. My father stood on the balcony above us, framed like a monarch. He raised his glass and announced that Alio, my younger brother, would be the official face of the new generation. A future senator, he said proudly. A Moreno by blood and by conviction. Everyone clapped, some even whistled. My mother dabbed a tear with her silk handkerchief. I stood near the edge of the crowd, hands clasped, pulse steady. No one looked at me, not even Emilio, especially not Emilio. You think I cry or leave, but I didn't. I stood still, letting their words wash over me like cold rain. I'd spent my 20s buried in court records and civil rights cases, working with survivors, building something that mattered, but none of it counted in their world. In their eyes, I wasn't a Moreno. I was just a daughter who'd refused the family script. Later, when the guests moved inside, I stepped out into the garden alone. The string lights buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere behind me, they were dancing, laughing, positioning Emilio for his photo op with the mayor. I stared out at the lawn, that perfect grass my father insisted we maintain year round. It looked the same as it did when I was 5, running through sprinklers barefoot. But I wasn't 5, and they weren't my family anymore. That night, I didn't cry. I drove back to my small apartment in silence. No music, no words, just the echo of my father's speech ringing in my ears, and one quiet sentence forming in my head. You want a future without me? Fine. Let's see how strong your empire really is without the daughter you try to forget. I hadn't packed much, just enough to fill a single suitcase and one box of files. The rest I left behind. Family photos, college awards, the framed newspaper clipping from my first civil rights case. They were all still at the estate. Maybe one day I'd go back for them, or maybe I wouldn't. My new apartment sat over a bakery in a quiet working class neighborhood on the east side. The ceilings were low, and the walls smelled faintly of flour and cinnamon by mid-afternoon. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No legacy attached. No last name opening doors or closing them. Just a lock I controlled and silence I chose. The morning after the reception, I sat on the floor of my bare living room, sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug. My inbox was full of unanswered messages from non-profits, legal groups, even an old professor offering consulting work. I stared at them blankly. I wasn't ready to answer anyone yet. I thought about law school, how hard I'd fought to earn my seat without invoking my last name. I was Juliet Moreno on paper, yes, but I'd insisted they judge me on merit, not blood. I graduated top 5% of my class, interned at the Southern Justice Initiative, spent weekends reviewing racial discrimination cases while my classmates were at beach parties. And my father, he used to brag about me. My daughter is the principled one, he'd say at fundraisers, like I was a rare moral accessory in his tailored political wardrobe. I believed him. For years, I thought I mattered to him, not just as a daughter, but as a mind, as someone who could carry the torch differently, perhaps even better. But that was before I said no, before I turned down the opportunity to be groomed into a local council seat, before I refused to give sound bites supporting legislation that hurt the people I served. That was when the shift began subtle, then sharp. First came the cancelled meetings, then the whispers, then the total silence. I didn't leave the family, they removed me, one omission at a time. That day, on my apartment floor, I pulled out a folder labeled simply Alio, Q3 funding. I'd seen something odd in the campaign reports weeks ago, a misalignment between donations and filings. I hadn't said anything then, I wasn't ready, but now I had time and nothing left to lose. I opened the folder, scanning through the names and numbers I'd once memorized from my compliance work. The same firms kept appearing Shellcore linked to property deals. My father had always insisted politics was clean in our house. We don't need shortcuts, he told me once. But shortcuts were everywhere here. They just wore tailored suits and smiled for cameras. I leaned back against the wall, heart steady, no rage, no sadness, just a quiet shift inside me, like the sound of a door clicking shut. They thought they'd erased me, but I knew where everything was buried, and for the first time in months, I felt the faintest spark of clarity. I wasn't coming back, I was going deeper. 2 weeks passed. No calls, no messages, no mention of me anywhere, not even a generic she couldn't attend. In the family's latest press release, Amelia was front and center now. Every headline, rising star of the Moreno dynasty. My mother posed beside him in pastel suits, all soft smiles and subtle jewelry. My father's hand rested proudly on Emilio's shoulder in every photo, like passing a torch he never intended me to hold. They weren't just ignoring me, they were rewriting the narrative. An old colleague forwarded me a press kit from the Moreno Foundation's new youth campaign. I flipped through the slides, glossy infographics, a mission statement I'd helped write 3 years ago, and a neatly cropped family photo with me edited out. Literally, my figure was replaced by a potted plant, a digital eraser. I didn't cry. I took a screenshot and filed it under a new folder. Evidence of intent. Not because I planned to sue, but because something inside me had started to shift from ache to analysis. Their lies weren't just personal anymore, they were procedural, and I knew procedure. Back when I worked compliance, I had a habit, tracing patterns, names that popped up too often, donations with round numbers, property transfers that didn't match market behavior, the kind of things that whispered trouble, not screamed it. That instinct kicked in again when I opened a new batch of Emilio's campaign filings, buried under layers of polished formatting. I found a line item consulting Grey Oak Strategy Partners. Sounded normal until I remembered that name from a training deck I'd once built for ethics audits. Grey Oaks was flagged for funneling international donations into domestic campaigns through real estate LLCs, legal sounding, deeply illegal. I searched further. 3 donations tied to shell companies, each registered within 2 months of Emilio announcing his campaign, all linked back to one P.O. box in Miami. Same street address as a property trust owned by a woman who used to work under my father's senatorial committee. Patterns again. I sat at my tiny kitchen table surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and sticky notes. It wasn't just greed, it was structure. An ecosystem of loyalty and silence built brick by brick over decades. And now, they placed Emilio at the top, thinking no one would look twice. But they trained me too well. They taught me how to look clean, speak flawlessly, present integrity like a performance. What they forgot was, I listened, I watched, I remembered, I stared at the filing report. Then, at the growing wall of printouts taped to my apartment walls. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't plotting to humiliate anyone. I just wanted truth. And I finally understood what my role was. Not the daughter, not the heir, but the record keeper they'd underestimated. They thought they were erasing me, but I was already writing the ending. I hadn't seen Aisha in almost 2 years, but she opened the door like I'd just been gone a weekend. Same warm smile, same no-nonsense energy. Her home office still smelled like sandalwood and paper anchored, grounded. A safe place, the kind that made you straighten your back and exhale at the same time. Juliet, she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than I expected. I figured you'd show up eventually. She didn't ask why I was there. She just poured 2 mugs of tea and sat across from me waiting. That's always how Aisha operated space first. Questions later, I didn't dive in. I told her about the reception, the digital eraser, the potted plant replacing me in the family photos. She laughed, not unkindly, but with the dry edge of someone who's seen power operate under too many disguises. They're not subtle, she said. But you already knew that. I nodded. Then I showed her the files, the shell companies, the suspicious line items. I expected her to raise an eyebrow, maybe take notes. Instead, she leaned back, folded her arms, and looked at me for a long beat. You're not here because you found dirt, she said. You're here because you finally believe they're not untouchable. That sentence sat between us like a lit candle. I hadn't put it into words before, but she was right. I'd grown up believing that wrongdoings only mattered when committed by strangers. That family was above exposure, that truth was negotiable when blood was involved. But that belief had died the moment they'd erased me and handed my seat to someone less qualified, less ethical, simply more obedient. I don't want to destroy them, I said quietly. I just want to stop pretending I owe them silence. Aisha smiled slow and steady. Then, don't yell, don't scream. Just follow the law exactly how they taught you. Use their tools, but use them better. She helped me organize the files into categories, donation patterns, real estate overlaps, prior affiliations. She reminded me which agencies had jurisdiction, which whistleblower protections existed if I chose to go public. But most importantly, she reminded me who I was before the name, before the title. You've always known how to build a case, she said, but now you get to build one that actually matters to you. I left her house with a flash drive in my coat pocket, and something even more valuable: clarity. Not rage, not revenge. Just a clear line drawn between what they expected me to stay silent about and what I was now willing to say. On the train ride home, I opened my notebook, one sentence at the top of the page. I am not the daughter they raised. I am the woman they underestimated. And underneath it, in Aisha's handwriting, justice doesn't need volume, it needs proof. The call came at 8:17 p.m. I was halfway through organizing a timeline of Emilio's campaign filings when the screen lit up with Mom in soft white letters. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but something told me to answer and record. I slid my phone to speaker, tapped the record button on a separate device, and said, "Hi." Her voice was smooth, syrupy. "Juliet, sweetheart, I was just thinking about you. I hope you're well." I didn't reply, just let the silence stretch. She filled it quickly. "I know things have shifted recently. Family transitions are always messy, but your father and I want to make sure you feel supported emotionally, financially, however we can." There it was, the bait. She launched in to talk about family unity, about needing to protect the public image, about the pressure Emilia was under stepping into my almost role. I listened without interruption, fingers brushing the edge of the manila folder in front of me. She sounded concerned, loving, but I'd lived long enough in her world to know when love came with a signature line. "There's a document," she finally said. "Just a formality with you stepping away from the Foundation's leadership board. It would help clarify tax positioning. If you signed off on your full withdrawal, it's not a removal, it's just a cleanup optics." She always had the perfect phrasing. Nothing ever sounded like manipulation, just maintenance. "I can send someone by tomorrow," she added. "Or you can drop by the estate." I kept my tone neutral. "Email it." She hesitated. "Just a second." Then her voice brightened again. "Of course. Darling, I'll have Diane send it over. No pressure. We just want to be sure everything is in order." I thanked her and hung up. The recording saved automatically. I backed it up in 3 locations. Then I opened the file marked Elio Assets. I hadn't dug into it deeply before, but the call had jolted something loose in me, a sense of urgency. If they wanted me legally erased, there had to be more buried under that motive. 10 minutes in, I found it. A Florida trust under Emilio's name filed 6 weeks before his campaign launch. Valued at $1-2 million, no mention of it in public declarations. Tied to a holding company linked to the same P.O. box I'd already flagged. And more importantly, co-signed by a shell corporation that listed my father's legal advisor as its sole officer. They didn't just want me gone. They needed me out before I connected the dots in time. I sat back in my chair, every cell in my body buzzing. Not with fear, but with precision. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about sequence, about exposure and timing. They were closing ranks, but I had already stepped outside the circle, and I wasn't coming back in. The next morning, I walked to the copy shop 2 blocks from my apartment. Not because I didn't have a printer, I did, but because I needed to separate this action from everything else. A clean location, no digital footprint. I carried 2 flash drives. One held scanned documents, campaign filings, property records, Shell Corporation registries. The second had audio files my mother's call and 2 voicemails from Emilio to a donor I'd quietly pulled from the archives. All edited, all time-stamped, all legal. The clerk barely glanced at me as he printed out the reports. I kept my eyes down, paid in cash, and asked for 3 envelopes, each thick with silent evidence, each addressed to a different recipient: the State Ethics Committee, the Office of Campaign Finance, and an investigative journalist I trusted back when I worked compliance. I wrote no return address, no signature, just a note in each package. Verify independently. Begin with the Grey Oaks. Follow the Miami Trail. That was it. No manifesto, no personal vendetta, just a breadcrumb trail for the right eyes. I dropped the envelopes in separate mailboxes across town, not all at once, over hours. I didn't want a pattern, just possibility. As I walked home, I passed by the billboard of Emilio, his campaign smile bright, eyes fixed on a future he hadn't earned. The tagline underneath read, "Integrity, Legacy, Service." I almost laughed. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun had dipped low. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the window, watching the last pink sliver of sky fade, and felt nothing but stillness. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't justice either. Not yet. It was motion, and that was enough. In the quiet, I reopened my notebook, drew a thin line down the center of a blank page. On the left, I listed dates. On the right, outcomes I could anticipate. Inquiries, public pressure, internal audits. I didn't need all three to land. I just needed one to stick. For the first time since that reception night, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I wasn't bracing for impact. I was charting it. The Morenos had spent decades building an image immune to scrutiny. They used protocol like armor, but I had lived inside that system too long to believe it was bulletproof. I knew where the gaps were, where things got rushed, where paperwork turned into power plays. They thought I left quietly. They didn't know I was documenting every silence, and now those silences had been mailed. It started with a headline, "Anonymous document suggests campaign misconduct in state senate race." I saw it on a news ticker at the bus stop, then again in a push notification, and finally in a text from an old colleague. "Is this you?" I didn't respond, just bookmarked the article and read it twice. It was clean, factual, no speculation, no accusations, just questions. The kind that made readers pause, the kind that made institutions sweat. Within hours, local networks picked it up. A cable segment aired an interview with a former compliance officer speculating about Grey Oaks and its shadowy donation history. Another article mentioned connections to a now-defunct PAC tied to real estate acquisitions in southern Florida. Elio's face was still on the posters, but suddenly his name was in footnotes too. The next morning, the Morenos held a closed-door meeting at the estate. I wasn't there, of course, but Diane, my mother's longtime assistant, sent a short, cryptic message to my encrypted email. "They're scrambling. He's furious. I could picture it. My father pacing the mahogany study. My mother calmly passing coffee, urging damage control. Elio demanding answers. None of them knowing where the leak came from, because there was no leak. Just paper, just facts. I spent the day mapping their likely responses. Press statement denying wrongdoing, blaming political sabotage, internal legal review, threats to journalists behind the scenes. All textbook, all predictable. But I wasn't watching them to be entertained. I was watching for cracks, and one appeared that evening when Alio deleted his campaign Twitter account. Not suspended, deleted like he was erasing something before it could be questioned. I smiled. That night, I pulled a fresh file, sub-trusts, quiet titles. Buried inside were property transactions that seemed unrelated until matched by date with donor names I'd flagged. A condo in Naples, a beachfront bungalow in Chiargo. Assets purchased under LLCs with initials matching board members from the foundation. They were sloppy. Greedy makes people that way, but I wasn't greedy. I was patient. As the estate buzzed with lawyers and PR consultants, I brewed tea, reorganized my folders, backed up everything twice. I wasn't racing them. I was outpacing them quietly. They had meetings. I had momentum. And I knew, without lifting a finger, I had already changed the conversation. For once, their narrative wasn't the only one on the table. They were finally reacting to me, and I hadn't said a word. The gala was supposed to be the crowning jewel of my father's legacy, an exclusive fundraiser hosted at the Capitol Club, packed with donors, politicians, and the media. The night Emilio would officially receive his nomination endorsement, the night they'd stand under the chandelier and bask in applause. But the ballroom stayed dark. I watched the news livestream from my apartment, tea cooling in my hand. Reporters stood outside the gates confused. The red carpet was rolled up. Guests turned away. Then came the headline, "Moreno Gala Connelled amid financial misconduct. Investigation." Beneath it, my father's photo, not in victory, but in profile. Stern face had under scrutiny. It had taken 8 days, one well-placed journalist, one leaked campaign memo, and a verified wire trail connecting Grey Oaks to unregistered offshore funds. The ethics committee announced an inquiry that morning. Amelia went silent on all platforms, and the family statement, a rushed 2S sentence note, blaming a technical delay in event planning. No one bought it. Diane messaged again. He broke a glass wall. First time I've ever seen him lose control. I imagined the moment, the silence in the study after the call, the way my father's voice might have cracked, when he realized the name Moreno no longer held immunity. The empire had tilted, not collapsed, not yet, but the illusion had fractured, and I hadn't lifted a single microphone. That night, the Capitol Club lobby lights flickered back on, staff moved quietly, boxing center pieces that would never be seen. A banner with Alio's face hung half lowered, swaying under the vents. I watched a grainy phone video of it online, soundless, not joy, not triumph, just closure. I didn't call anyone, didn't send a message. I just updated my wall, pinning the official inquiry notice next to the trust documents and donation breakdowns. I drew one red line connecting the gala cancellation to a single date, the night they replaced me with a champagne toast. Justice didn't look like fireworks. It looked like silence finally speaking back. I stood by the window watching streetlights flicker over parked cars and quiet sidewalks. No parades, no crowds, just one woman alone in her apartment, watching the machines sputter from a distance. They had built a dynasty. I had rewritten the ending. She didn't call first, she just showed up, standing in the dim hallway of my building, wrapped in a tailored coat too elegant for the cracked tile floor. My mother never liked surprises, so her presence here was its own message. I opened the door. She didn't ask to come in, just waited. I stepped aside. The apartment felt smaller with her in it. She glanced around. No portraits, no silver trays, no scent of gardenias like the estate, just books, folders, and the faint smell of ginger tea. She said nothing about it. We sat across from each other. I didn't offer her tea. She didn't ask. I came alone, she said after a moment. Your father doesn't know. I nodded once. They're scared, she continued. Not of jail, of losing face, of becoming irrelevant. I said nothing, let her fill the silence. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair still immaculate, but her voice less crisp. There was a tremble in her hand. She tried to hide under the table. I'm not here to defend what we did, she said quietly. But I want to ask you something, not as a Moreno, as your mother. The word didn't sting the way it used to. I waited. Please, she said. Let it end here. Don't go further. Don't bring down the name entirely. There's nothing left to gain. I let the words settle. Then I said, there's nothing left to lose either. Her eyes welled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not her style. You've made your point, she said, and they've heard it loudly. No, I said gently. They haven't heard anything. That's the point. They only hear silence, and they still think that's control. She looked away. I stood, walked to the shelf, and pulled a folder thin, sealed, labeled, deferred. I placed it on the table. This is the last one, I said. It doesn't go to the press. It doesn't go to court unless they try to erase me again. She stared at it. I'm not angry, I added. I'm just done being expendable. She nodded slowly, stood at the door. She turned. You look like your grandmother when you speak like that. I didn't ask if it was meant as a compliment. She left without another word. I sat for a long time afterward, staring at the folder. Not because I wanted to send it, but because I finally knew I didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was boundaries, and they'd been drawn. The new office was modest third floor, no elevator, nestled between a community arts center and a second-hand bookstore. No polished floors or boardroom gloss. Just a wooden desk, a shared printer, and a folder with my name on it. Well, just my first name. I joined as a policy researcher for Equal State Initiative. No headlines, no press release. They didn't ask for my pedigree, only my work. I'd given them references, sample reports, and a single-page resume. The last line on the intake form said, preferred name for internal records. I wrote Juliet, no Moreno, no echoes of the family that had tried to define and discard me. Just the name I chose to keep. I spent the day reviewing case files, housing inequities, zoning loopholes, overlooked neighborhoods, real problems, not photo ops, the kind of work that didn't make legacy headlines, but changed actual lives. Around noon, I stepped out for tea. The barista asked for my name, spelled it with one T. I didn't correct her. It wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was about anonymity and how strangely freeing that felt. My phone buzzed once. An update from the State Commission. 2 subpoenas issued, one directed at a known donor from the foundation. The wheels were turning slowly but turning. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just walked back to my desk, sipped my tea, and got back to work. because I hadn't dismantled the Moreno Empire for applause. I'd done it to breathe, and now, finally, I could. Some victories aren't loud. They don't come with trophies or applause. Sometimes real victories walking away, not in anger, but in clarity. Juliet didn't destroy a dynasty, she just refused to let it define her worth, and in doing so, she reclaimed more than power, she reclaimed peace. If you've ever been erased, underestimated, or told to stay quiet to protect someone else's image, this story is for you. Drop a comment, I'm choosing my name too, and don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell icon, and join us again for more true stories that fight for dignity, one voice at a